Hello, family. This is Pastor Winfield here, and I want to welcome you to our panel discussion on race. And this is going to be a powerful conversation because for the past few weeks, even for the past month or two, we have been in this conversation in dealing with race. And it's been so tumultuous. It's been filled with so much tension that oftentimes when we are talking about race, we're talking about it filled with emotion and passion and not necessarily sitting down to articulate intelligently the issues that we do face behind race and the things that we are going to do to make sure that race does not impact how we succeed in this life. And so I want us to have this conversation, and I've invited some illustrious panelists to help me to have this conversation. In fact, I've always been told that if you're the smartest one in the room, that you're in the wrong room. And so now I'm not the smartest one on this panel, but I'm smart enough to invite these panelists to have a conversation with us. So I'm so excited to have them with us. I want you to welcome to the stage Kendall Locke, who is our student community activist from right to left. And then after Kendall, there's Demetria Bivens, who is the executive director of DFW chapter, National Association of Minority Contractors. And then to her left, we have Quentin Phillips, who is the Fort Worth ISD School Board Trustee for District 3 and Community Frontline co-founder. And then to his left, it's Abiola Agoru, who is the Millennial Political Consultant. And then we have Dr. Jared Williams, who is the Regional Director for Leadership ISD Tarrant County. And we have Sean Lassiter, Chief of Equity and Innovation of Leadership ISD Tarrant County. We have Devoy Jennings, who is the president of Fort Worth Metropolitan Black Chamber of Commerce. And then in our Zoom room, we have Christina Brooks, Chief Equity Officer, Director of Diversity and Inclusion for the City of Fort Worth. We have Jerry Hawkins, who is the Executive Director of Dallas Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation. And last but certainly not least, we have Patty Bates-Ballard, who is the creative director and owner of Word Smooth. And so we have these wonderful panelists that's going to help us to discuss and have a conversation about race. Notice that we're trying to practice social distancing, and we have on our mask, and I've got mine on too. I'm just talking. And so I want us to understand this principle of race. Now, the first thing that I want us to do is to have a conversation about the idea of race. It is a social construct, a political construct that it was created to try to make the oppressor feel good or feel better about oppressing, in particular, Africans and African slaves. As a result, race has found its way covertly instituted or inculcated within the different systems that we find ourselves in today. How has this racial tension that we find ourselves in personally impacted you? Now, I know that we've seen a whole lot of things happen on the television. I know we have been inundated with media images and things of that nature. But how has this racial tension impacted you? What are some of the thoughts that came up in your head when you were seeing all the issues that we find ourselves going through right now? Anybody? Y'all can just jump on in.
Yeah, indeed. So, of course, thank you to the Potter's House of Fort Worth. Thank you, Pastor Winfield, for everything you're doing, having these tough conversations. And yeah, when it comes to the impact that this whole time period has begun to have, when it comes to me, it sent me into a place of what is my role when it comes to what this new movement looks like. Mm-hmm. We had the civil rights movement that has its designations as far as a time period and everything. And then we have this point in time to where the movement didn't stop, but there was like this lull that it seems like that we got ourselves into as a society, as if we had made something, or even if it was just lulling to sleep, that we had done what we can do for the time period. this new time period has awakened us and allowed us to know that struggle is not over, that we do have many things that we have to do right now in this space. And so now the self-inventory aspect of what does that mean as far as my role within that. So when I began thinking about my role, I had to first do the self-inventory of checking where my heart is.
Okay.
Simply because for so long I've been able to play the peacekeeper in many of the roles that I had.
Gotcha.
But these new instances have began to draw out some vile hatred even within myself, particularly towards my white brothers and sisters.
Gotcha.
Because it was a fed upness. It was a sick and tired of being sick and tired, like so many of us I know that we feel. And I did not want that to be the hindrance that happened here in the movement, right? So I had to do the self-inventory. I had to do the impact of what does this mean for my life and what mindset and where do I have to get spiritually in order to be able to go and do the most good to make sure that we're pushing the ball where it's supposed to be going. So it impacted me in that way of having to do the sin check on my own life.
Wow.
It impacted me in the way of having to look inwardly within my own household to say, how am I governing accordingly here, taking care of my queen, taking care of my two princes. And then understanding that at 11 and 6 years old, that there were some really tough conversations. Even though I've never shied away from the conversations with my young men, two boys I have in my household, it now was going to have to be a shift about what the role and responsibility was going to begin to look like. So that's what began happening here as far as me and how it affected me, is that understanding that there is absolutely a role I have to play, but analyzing what that role is and how can I bring my best self into that role to make sure I'm doing good and not harm.
So for you, it led you into a place of introspection to see how you're going to respond both in your house and also to some of your coworkers who are white and who are Hispanic, and you, so that tension has kind of led you to a place of introspection to know how to engage other people. How about anybody else? Anybody else like to share? Go ahead, Kendall.
Well, I'll say that personally, more than anything, it has affected me emotionally, because seeing these different horrific acts, I think of, that could have been me. That could have been one of my family members, even a classmate. And so I think it's definitely brought along some personal reflection, especially as I am transitioning from high school, getting ready to enter into college, and really trying to figure out what can my role be in trying to fill in the gaps, and to really just bring back and restore some sense of justice into the community. So I think it's been a lot of, emotions, and in addition to that, just really just trying to figure out what can I do, what impact can I make on not just myself, but just the generation at large. And so I would just pretty much say that's been the main thing. It's just really been weighing on me emotionally. So,
Wow. Okay. So still reflection on you, where you are in your life, and then how do you impact and engage with people even moving forward for you?
correct.
Yeah. That's interesting. Anybody else?
Sure, I would like to jump in.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. So for me, I'm a grandmother of 5. I have a 7, almost a 7-year-old and an 8-year-old. My 6-year-old grandson, our conversations is he's never seen a black person before because he identify color to crayons. So he's considered himself peach. But to go through and watching all this Black Lives Matter, everything that's going on, I'm watching CNN all the time. So it impacted me too at home because now I have to tell this little kid, no, you're not peach, you black, I have to start teaching him about his ethnicity. And for both of them, it's a boy and a girl. But my grandson, he's still confused. I'm confused, what am I supposed to say? I don't want to crush him. I don't want to start teaching him about, just hating or disliking but I have to prepare him because if something comes up, he needs to know his place, right? He needs to know his place and how things are and why these black men are getting killed and hurt and incarcerated and all of that. So it's a very confusing time. my boys, I have a 32-year-old, is my youngest son. I didn't have to have these conversations with my boys. I lost my other son at 30 in a car accident. But I didn't have to have those conversations when they were 6 and 7 years old. I do remember one time when the oldest one was called the N-word in the grocery store, and we just kind of brushed it off. Oh, just ignore that. That's not important. But today, it's really different. So for me personally, I thought that was the first thing that came to my mind, how that really impacted me. The other thing is I feel like I needed to do something. Protests? What? They're going to be marching? I'm in Mansfield. They're going to be marching? Man, I got to do something. I finished up a Zoom call. I went right there to the Mansfield High School, and I jumped right in. I've never done a protest before. I don't know, it felt really good. It felt really good being in the mix of all of that and say their names and, we're no justice, no peace. So I felt like I had to get in action and do something. I couldn't just sit back. I couldn't sit back, but anyway, let somebody else talk.
Wow. I'm going to jump to you, Abby, in just a moment. I want to go back to something that you said, that you had to talk to your grandson. You said grandson, right?
Grandson, yes.
And because his world concept, his worldview of himself was based off crayons, and not necessarily he was too young to be socialized into his blackness. But the older he gets, the more, according to what you have been saying, that you have to prepare him for how the world perceives him, even more than how he perceives himself. So he's not peach. In his head, he's peach, but to the world, he's black. That is so powerful to me. That is so powerful to me. I hopefully we get a chance to come back to that. I really do want to come back to that. Yeah, Abby.
For me, I feel like it reignited kind of this burning, I don't want to say anger, but this fire I've kind of always had in regards to justice and social justice. After I helped with the March for Black Women in 2016 in DC, and so during that time period, I was very active. I believe Eric Garner died in 2017, so that was another little flame. But after just kind of focusing on school for a few semesters, doing a lot of my fashion work, and then being sent home by the pandemic and coming home to this, it just kind of just lit it all the way back up, and put it in a way that I haven't had it feel in such a long time. Having to reevaluate everything from the companies I'm buying from to the artists that I support financially even. I had to remove multiple artists whose work I've used for things because when I sent them a message saying, hey, I know that you don't necessarily do any work like this. I need to kind of know what you're doing right now at this moment. And they sent back very nasty messages like, stop talking about race. If you stop talking about it, it goes away. So having to literally reevaluate everything in my life again and kind of check myself and make sure, okay, I could do this black owned instead of buying this from there. I could make sure that, I'm not supporting this candidate because, this candidate is refusing to talk about Black Lives Matter. And while I don't believe in single issue voting, I think this is a moment in time where we can be single issue voters for once. So it was just, it's a lot of reevaluation, a lot of reawakening, and a lot of kind of moving parts around to try and reorient my life back into the way it can be most effective and the way it's most positively impacting us.
Yeah. Now you said something that was, gosh, these are some serious, significant issues. Of course, when we have the conversation about race, it's going to be uncomfortable, especially for other people who may not be black. Okay. So what you're saying is some have told you we don't want to talk about race because if we don't talk about it, it may go away.
It's a strong belief that a lot of people have of it. The more you bring it up is the reason why it creates division.
I want us to settle here with this mindset here that if we don't talk about it, it somehow disappears. I wonder if we don't talk about bills. If we just don't bring up that I owe the car note or the mortgage, maybe, just maybe, it will go. Okay, all right. I don't mean to be facetious, but that's interesting. But because I heard that sentiment before, And that's the reason why we're having these hard and difficult conversations. And I've had these conversations with white pastors and with white leaders, and to really force the issue. And I know that there is uncomfortability there, and I understand the reason why too. But that is a pervasive sentiment that's out there. So thank you for sharing that. But those of you who didn't hop in on that one, maybe you can hop in on this question. This racial tension that we have seen, either the dastardly murder of Ahmaud Arbery or Sandra Bland or Breonna Taylor, or right here in our own backyard in Fort Worth, Tatiana Jefferson, and recently George Floyd. You know, the issue of race has been around for years. It's not something that just surprised us. Many of us have seen issues of race, and hopefully you may dive in on this one, DeVoy, because I think that you're the senior statesman. Yeah, we respect you. The Bible says respect the gray-haired ones, and so I'm dying mine. But we want to deal with this issue because it's been around for years and it will not go away. All right? No matter how we don't discuss it, because in the times that we don't discuss it, it seems like it still shows its ugly head. So what are some things that you are doing to enlighten, engage, and lead an effort to combat systematic racism within this country? Is there something that we are doing, or something that you are doing individually, maybe in the work that you're doing, to have these valuable conversations, to lift them up from the places in which people are trying to bury them and or ignore them?
As you say, thanks, I needed that.
Yes, sir.
Being a civil rights baby, which I am, the focus during that time was basically social, because it was civil rights. So I come through the 60s, and part of the first question gets in this because after you've seen it for 40 years, you get it pissed off. Yep. You really do. Because people my age will say, I'm back here. Yeah. I don't believe, but I am back here. Yes. So that creates some tension just within a person who came up against these odds during the civil rights period. From a personal perspective, from a job perspective, what we attempt to do and continue to do at the Chamber is how do you attack this issue today? And I always say for every social ill, there's an economic answer. Mm. And we're on the economic side of the equation, so things that we're trying to do is basically stay in our lane, because we know that you all are going to continue to push the social buttons. But I think we need to push the economic buttons.
Come on, talk on that.
And today, for instance, I had a meeting with about a half a dozen bankers. Mm. And the reason, naturally, is that they are controlling money. Yes. So I think the more we start looking at the economic inequities that exist, that keeps us in the places that we are, the better we off going to be. Mm-hmm. So our position basically is that it's time for civil rights, but it's time for silver, S-I-L-V-E-R rights. Because we got to get to the silver and gold to make our souls better and make it better for her grandkids and my grandkids. Yes. So our message today is civil rights. And let's get into the arena of economic development, inequities that we have in jobs, contracting, ways of making a living economically. Mm-hmm. And part of the federal system in America is who has the gold rules. And the gold is in the banks. Yes. So part of our conversation, not only here in Fort Worth, but through our black chambers across the state, is going to be talk to your bankers and see how many black folks can be positioned on their boards. We need some position on their boards. Then they need to look at a young lady and a young men that are here and say, how many of these folks do I have next to me that can tell me the real truth? So often what I've seen since a lot of us came out of corporate America about 10, 15 years ago, is that they have no people of color next to them, at least our color. And it hurts us because what they're realizing now is that the truth is coming out, and the story they tell is his story, not the story.
So true. So true. Don't just fight for civil rights, fight for silver rights.
That's where I am.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to go. I want to come back there towards the end when we start talking about some viable solutions, because I really do believe that economics is a part of those viable solutions, and education and educating our people on those economics, because those things are not necessarily taught in schools. They're taught at home more so than they're taught in schools. So I want to deal with that. Anybody else? Any of our panelists on Zoom? Would you guys like to jump in on this one?
Yeah, I think the irony of the conversation around economic development in the United States is an interesting one, considering that the position that the United States enjoys as a superpower, an economic superpower throughout the world, is due in large part to the free labor that slavery provided. And our financial system in the United States was formulated based on the slave trade. The stock market itself and futures trading was born of slave holders and slave owners looking at the viability of the black body. How long can you work this body? And let's bet on that and create a financial system. And that's what we see today on Wall Street. And so when we look at that and understand that it was free labor, free black labor, that financially built this country, and we are left out of financial opportunities as business owners, as potential homeowners, we can't get a fair shot at financial packages and products in the marketplace that our ancestors built. And so some of the things that, we're doing in our department in Fort Worth to address and dismantle systemic racism really starts with not only the work in our business equity division, working with minority and women businesses, making sure that they have a fair shot at city contracts, but also making sure that they are building the capacity of those businesses so that they're not just dependent on contracts with the city of Fort Worth, but we want to see progress in black businesses so that they're able to expand, hire more people, purchase more equipment, increase their bonding capacity so that they can have access to large dollar contracts and not just kind of relegate them to small subcontracting opportunities, but really making sure that they are able to enter into a contract as the prime in a contract situation. And so one of the things that we're doing is we're taking the cap off of our minority business enterprise prime program. Right now there's a cap of $100,000. And so if you're a minority business, you could not count your own participation towards a contract goal. And we're removing that. We're in the middle of rewriting the ordinance. We are reviewing all the policy.
No, keep on going. I was just saying thank you. You got a hand clap in here for doing that.
We're rewriting the policy around our participation as a municipal government and the part that we can play in dismantling systemic racism. So that involves looking at individuals as well as institutions that influence the system. And, that's just one aspect of what we're doing on the economic side. And internally, we're going to hold ourselves accountable by reviewing all of our municipal service delivery by department. And we're going to be reviewing ordinances and laws at the state and municipal level that may impact that. We're going to be looking at and listening to the people in the community that are impacted by the delivery of service and the quality of the delivery of service that as a city, their taxpayer dollars are going towards. And so we have a lot of things that we're busy doing. And that's one of the things that I hope people take away from this conversation tonight is that, you have influence where you are.
Yes.
You don't have to wait until you get fill in the blank. You can do something right where you are. And understand what part you play in the system, because everybody has a part to play. It doesn't matter what racial or ethnic origin you come from. We've all been conditioned to participate in this system. And so coming to that awareness and then beginning to actively and intentionally dismantle that system is something that we can all do.
Thank you for that. That's great information. Anybody else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I would like to add some historical context to that.
All right, come on, Jerry. And then after Jerry, we'll go to.
So at Dallas Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation, we are use a framework called Truth, which is narrative change, racial healing, which is relationship building, and transformation, which is equitable policies and practices. But the work starts with the truth. And locally, Fort Worth and Dallas, DFW as a whole, North Texas as a whole, has not grappled with the truth of its beginning. Fort Worth itself was set up by General Tarrant as a Indian protection fort for white settlers to get free land. Dallas, as a place even after Reconstruction, was the largest inland cotton port in the world, with wealth that primarily was built by Black sharecroppers after enslavement. There's a lot that we have to encounter. Not only is that our history, but it is what we have to repair. I think the city of Fort Worth and the city of Dallas and all of the other municipalities have to first apologize for that, that displacement and that genocide of Native people. The land that we are on now, in Fort Worth and in Dallas and Arlington is the land of the Caddo Nation, is the land of the Wichita, the land of the Comanche. There are very few markers and, plaques that say that in the cities that we are living in and working in. Secondly, these are places where Black people were enslaved. There are very few, if any, recognizable, notices to that. There's definitely not any city apology and definitely not any city repair or reparations for that work. And so local reparations have to happen, and also federal repair for that harm has to happen. Because after the harm, we have not just Reconstruction, but we have Jim Crow policies. We have racist housing policies. We also have highways that went through Black communities. We have racist school policies. All of the school districts started out as exclusionary school districts, exclusionary government practices. And so I can keep going and going. There's such a long list that we have to do two things. One is qualify the harm that was done. We have to get those stories from communities who are still here. We have to dig in those histories of the cities and get that qualified data. The second is we have to quantify that harm. There's been an economic harm done because of these policies, and they were policies that stated race. The city of Dallas had a separations of races charter from 1931 to 1968 that said that white people and black people could not live together. And that meant that it was separate and unequal parts of the city, which had an economic, value to it. So it's really important that we do that work.
Thank you so much for that history. I want to go back. I want to go back and deal with something that you talked about in just a moment, right after your comment.
I thank you, Jerry, for that, because
Yes.
I think it's important that I really look at my place in this conversation about race. I've dedicated my life to really engaging groups to engage in conversations about race, but I know that it has to happen on 3 levels. It's a personal transformation of the heart, and then it's that community and collective consciousness that we have to have, and then in that community and collective consciousness, we have to begin to tackle the policies and the procedures. It can't go the other way. We oftentimes try to start with this policy transformation, yet we give the policies to the same handlers that built the racist system in the first place.
Wow.
So when we talk about how do we show up to combat systemic racism in our place in that, and Jerry really saying something like the truth. And I think that it's fitting that we're in a place of truth, and how the church, in the beginning, right, was used as an ally to supremacy and was used to every Sunday preach the doctrine of racism. And so how then does the truth now uplift what it means to add anti-racism as a part of the good news? And so I think about, I started off this conversation in race, in education, but I know that we can't stop there. It's gotta be about how do all sectors first begin that transformation of the heart individually? And then how do we do it collectively? And then how then do we dismantle policies? Because if we don't come together and really dismantle those policies and add language in there that will not allow inequities to rise, then it's not an anti-racist policy. We're just changing the words. And so I think about what Jerry said, and I think about how important it is to tell the truth. And so I'm really looking forward to this moment, this movement moment, to really infiltrate the church walls and institutions that we've grown to be socialized to trust, to begin to speak the truth and to say that it isn't a white Jesus.
Come on.
Right? And so, but we don't, where's the courage? Where's the moral courage to then take down those images? Right? Where's the moral courage to then give the counter narrative to what it means to be not just black, because I think of race in 3 C's. Race is color, culture, and consciousness. Because you can have black skin and then have culture of white supremacy. And so are we putting the right people in place? So, we can be diverse. That's a good step. But if we're diverse with people who still have the same ideology of racism, then we just continue to rebuild the same structure. So, I just think I'd love that we're here and we're having the conversation, but we got to start speaking that truth. Right?
Can I just add? This is so good on so many different levels because the things that Jerry just brought out. When I first moved here, I moved here from Las Vegas. I'm originally from Chicago, and I moved here from Las Vegas to be the principal over a school.
I'm from Chicago too.
Really? I knew there was something about you, man. You had that thing on you. Yeah, and when I came here, one of the things that I had to do is to look at the curriculum to see what it was teaching. That was one of the key things that I always did as the principal. I looked at the curriculum that was coming to us to see what was being taught in the classrooms. One of the things that I thought was very interesting, and this is not just the curriculum that was here, but it's also when I was teaching in Chicago or when I was teaching in Las Vegas, that the African American, Asian American, Hispanic and Latino American contributions to this country were given sentences, maybe paragraphs, and maybe a little insert in a section, but not given the whole book. But yet and still, it was called U.S. American history. When I came here, it was called Texas, state of Texas history. And so the things that Jerry was talking about are not the things that was in the history book. My question, and all you educators that are here, maybe y'all can help me. I know that we are tearing down statues and things of that nature, and there is an uproar depending on who you're talking to about the tearing down of those statues, especially if they held some significant position in history. But my question is, wasn't there other people that held significant impact? I mean, if the country, the economic stability of this country was built off the backs of people of color, then wasn't that not significant? And if it is significant, then why aren't we protesting to make sure that we change the books, change the curriculum, change the history, change all of it to inculcate everything?
Well, Pastor,
talk to me.
How do you spell history?
How do you spell it?
Mm-hmm.
History. His story.
You got it.
There you go.
That's why the books and all of that was done the way it does, because he's telling his story.
Certainly.
Not your story. Not people of color story. And that's why when I was in school, they didn't allow any black history to be taught. And I didn't learn about it till I got in corporate America and just went crazy when I got it, because they know the real story is not all about them. Like Ms. Brooks mentioned, Wall Street and Chicago stock market was built, and I got a picture in my boardroom of slaves that are underground holding up Wall Street.
Wow.
And I'm not bragging, but my granddaughter works on Wall Street, and I said, what a dichotomy today. But you couldn't even go down there. I lived in New York. You can go down there, but it didn't mean anything. So it's the history, it's his story that has kept us captivated. So it's a mindset. It's brainwashing. But I think these young folks and some of us senior citizens are ready to break out of it. Like you said, we're tired of being sick and tired.
I love it. Dr. Jarrett?
Yeah, growing up in South Fort all my life, I was raised by two educators that worked in schools 40 plus years in South Fort Worth. And one of the things that they instilled in me as a young boy, as a young black boy, was really the power in our community. And I mean community in a very broad sense, community of our city. And the power of that community is in the power of perspective. And so when we talk about policies, practices, when we talk about resource allocations, if it's only done from one perspective, then we haven't fully achieved the opportunity that's in front of us.
I hear you.
The power of our city is in the power of perspectives at a table. To this day, I work at my mom's dining room table. And y'all know, if y'all had any mom like mine, the dining room table was for the dining room table.
Yes.
It wasn't for us to sit and eat at, and it certainly wasn't for what I use it for now, sticking sticky notes all over the place. And because I like sticky notes, I need a leaf in the middle of the table. A leaf that, I don't know if other cultures call it this, but in my black culture, the leaf is the extension of the table. And when we talk about perspective, we also have to talk about, especially as policymakers, am I offering up a leaf that then creates space for transformation to happen, right? Another thing my grandmother used to tell me, she said, some of the best leaders listen, learn, and then act. And I think that in policymaking, too often, especially in eras of crisis, we go straight to, we got to do something.
Yeah.
Right? And the power of our perspective is only our power. But when you combine it with other perspectives, then we have a whole new power. A power that can solve why there's racial disparities in education. A power that can solve why there's racial disparities in transit system. A power that, solves affordable housing, affordable health care, all of these complex and convoluted issues that we face. And the reason they're complex and convoluted is because we've limited our power of perspective that can really solve some of these issues. One last thing, and I'll share the space. I believe that when we're talking about how do we begin to heal a city from the pains of race, and such a painful history and such a painful concept, right? Sometimes that's why it's hard to talk about. There's a lot of pain there. Yeah. But I believe that the conversation of race also has power, because then we get to celebrate our uniqueness. We get to celebrate our identities. We get to come to the table with our full selves and watch what transformation happens, not only in our personal lives, not only in our communities. Equally as important, I think we'll also see transformation in a city, in a Fort Worth, that really is a model for the world.
Yeah. Yeah. So to be able to, first of all, deal with the truth of the diversity that had to go into the growth and the development of this particular city, of this particular area, this region, and at the same time to be able to, from that understanding, move into other places and spaces where our voices are heard in viable conversations concerning or shifting policies, things that will impact us as a people and things that will impact the city, both financial, educational, and otherwise, right? Patty, do you want to hop in? You want to hop in here? And thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. I know it may be uncomfortable a little bit, but thank you so much for having some courage and hopping in. You want to hop in on this one?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Pastor Winfield and Tiffany, my old friend, for inviting me. Somebody said early on that if we don't talk about racism, it'll go away. And of course, the opposite is true, because not talking about it is what allows it to continue. Each of the incidents that we've been having to look at, each one of them takes an emotional toll on me. And at the same time, I've really been surprised at how many white people in my network are taking a stand and speaking up against racism for the first time in their lives.
Yeah.
And so that lifts me up a little bit. I've been doing this work a long time, and sometimes, I feel like I could use some more support from my own community, and so I'm glad that that's happening. As we said, race was invented and it was infused into all of our systems very overtly back a few hundred years ago. No bones about it, right out in the open. Now, it doesn't have to be overt to continue. And it continues, what it does, though, is it continues to reinforce that unconscious bias that then continues to carry out the systemic racism. So it's this cycle that continues itself. So what I work on pretty much every day is I work with groups and companies and organizations, nonprofits, schools, to look inward at the ingrained beliefs that we're carrying around and look at the policies and the practices that are reinforcing systemic racism. Working a lot with schools, one of the big things that they're doing now is social emotional learning. But a lot of times they don't think anything about the cultural differences and the experiences of different groups and how that impacts how they should be teaching social emotional learning. So we work with them on that. We work with organizations to look at the climate, that this kind of intangible environment. Is it exclusive or is it inclusive? What's the messaging of the organization? What are you doing with hiring and promotions? And how are you looking at subcontracting? How conscious are you? And a lot of companies all of a sudden are feeling the pressure because millions of people all of a sudden are, who I guess were kind of shrugging their shoulders at systemic racism for however long. All of a sudden they've overnight just decided that they are going to expect systemic change. And so companies are starting to really have to look more carefully at what they're doing and look at their leadership, because leadership matters. And I just want to close by saying I'm really, really happy to know DISD just recently introduced African American studies, Latino studies. And so my son will be entering high school this coming fall, and I'm really excited for him to be able to take those studies and learn the whole history that we all need to know.
Thank you for that. And, I think that's one of the things that I believe has captured the imagination of the world, because it's not just Black people that are vying for racial equality. It is not just black people who are vying for racial equity, that there is this standing shoulder to shoulder with other nationalities, other ethnic groups that will see the inequity and will stand for justice. And I appreciate that, and I appreciate the work that they are doing. Patty lifted up a term that I want to just kind of dive into: unconscious bias. We sometimes call it stereotypes. We have talked about implicit bias. We talked about how these biases are seen and inculcated within certain programming, within either our entertainment areas or education and things of that nature. We see it through movies. We see it through all kinds of caricatures that we see that are placed in front of us. In the early 1900s, these caricatures was created by white people to give an impression and a stereotype of how all black people were. And so you see the Sambo, you see the Step and Fetch It, you see the Mammy figure. All of these are caricatures to give people who have not met with us or interacted with black people personally an ideology of who we are. It's created stereotypes. And so, Kendall, if somebody sees you, they will immediately think that you play football, right? Right? Because you can't have that size and not be athletic, right? If somebody sees somebody tall and lanky, they will immediately think that they play basketball, and so on and so forth. These biases exist. If I tell somebody that I'm from Chicago and I'm wearing an Adidas sweatshirt and with my hat on, then immediately what goes through their head is, wow, you must have been in a gang, or at some point you must have been a thug. I mean, there's no, just based off of what people have heard about Chicago. So there used to be a time in which we used to know and understand that these stereotypes existed. And as a result, we used to really talk about representation. That we talk about it with our kids. You go out here and you don't you misbehave. Now you remember that's not your last name. That's a last name that was given to you. All right, it meant something. It meant something, and it means something to this very day. So you make sure that you don't mess up that last name, right? That there was a conversation about making sure that our behavior and our deportment was one that was a cut above everything, because we know that in order for us to be considered intelligent, we've got to be 3 cuts above what the average or what the norm is, right? That's the extra work. So how do we in this community, as a community, how do we challenge these false assumptions together? Because I know that we cannot kill them individually, but how do we challenge these false assumptions, these stereotypes, these implicit biases together as a community? How do we do that?
Well, I want to jump in this first because I experience stereotypes on the daily. And I think first it's really about accepting that you're not going to fall into it. And I'll just give you an example. So I was selected back in January as a delegate to the United States Senate Youth Program. So I was getting invited to different organizations across Fort Worth to be recognized. And so I was in the elevator, headed up to one event. And there were 2 white men in the elevator. And so we, of course, and I introduced myself, they introduced themselves. And they said, okay, so you're a singer? And I was like, yeah. And they said, okay, so you're going to play for the Dallas Cowboys. And I was like, no, I'm going to college. And they said, oh, really? And I said, yes, I'm going and I'm studying political science. And they said, oh, so you're not going to play football? And I said, no. They said, well, are you going on a, athletic scholarship? And I was like, well, no, I'm just going, academic based. And so just kind of brushed off the shoulder. And so then once I actually got into the event and was recognized, it was a wow factor. And so they came back and they were like, oh, well, congratulations, you're going to go far, X, Y, and Z. So I think it's really about accepting that you're not going to fall into the stereotype. And I think it really begins with the younger generation because we see stereotypes while we're younger and we don't take or we don't recognize that there are stereotypes due to, our cognitive level. So we don't view those as stereotypes. But as we continue to grow older and older, and we start to learn what those actually mean. So I just think it's all about not falling into it and using that as a motivating factor to really just make yourself those cuts above and to really show that you're not falling into that. I think it's just all about using that as a driving factor to do better throughout the community, but then the community coming together behind that individual to provide them the resources that they need in order to thrive. So.
I want to just kind of jump in it. I'm part of the National Association of Minority Contractors, the DFW chapter. And when NAMAC itself was founded back in 1969 in Oakland, California. When I got exposed to NAMAC, it was probably about 8 years ago when I first got into the industry. I think I had been in the construction industry for a couple of years. I went to a conference down in Houston, and I'm looking around the room, and I'm like, all these people from Dallas is here in Houston, right? So I wanted to bring, and you probably know some of this story, but I wanted to bring an association here that really, truly focused on trade contractors. We represent all ethnicities and women-owned contracting, trade contractors and general contractors. But I want to go to the stereotype because they all, you go work on these big projects, they think that, oh, they're not qualified. We don't know where they are. They put everybody in the same boat. But once I started really over the last 10 years, now I'm involved with a national association. I see brothers and sisters doing $100 million, $200 million running businesses. Here in Texas, we are definitely stereotyped because they're like, you know what, y'all just don't know how to go make no money. So that's why I fought so hard to get this association here. We've been here strong and running for 4 years now. We deal with major corporate partners, the big boys. I intentionally make them talk to our black contractors. What is it that they need to do to build their capacity? Oh, if it's bonding, okay, let's go get Drew over here and talk about the bonding. Because not every job have to be bonded, but it's a stereotype, because I know guys that's not in Texas work on big jobs and don't even have to bond to work. And besides, what difference does it make anyway about bonding when the general contractors, they're not paying out of their pocket, it's pay when paid. So why does that even matter, right? You know what I mean? So why does that matter? So it's all a stereotype when it comes to just our black businesses, our minority businesses, our women-owned businesses, because they think that we don't have the capacity to do things. But you know what? But once we learn our worth, we'll get over that. We have to learn our worth. We can't be afraid to sit down at that table, and thank God I'm at a church because I'll be using some different words. But we can't be afraid to sit at the table and demand it. If we can be there, if we can be your black, brown, or whatever you need while you're pursuing this work, then once you get the contract, then we got to sit back and still beg you. You don't want the job. So we go, okay, so you don't use us for 30%. Now you want to give us 2% of the value of the contract. Right. So to me, that's all a stereotype because they think just because you're a minority or you're black or you're a woman, that this is just how it's going to be. And until we stop it, it's going to keep happening. We can't be afraid to talk to Christine Brooks. You heard what Christine was saying. Yes. We cannot be afraid to go to these city council meetings and demand it. If you're in your community and your city council does not represent the community that they serve, there's a problem with that.
Come on.
There is a problem. So what we've started doing, and I was bold with it. I was scared as crap, but I did it. I went to a city council meeting and I called them out. I got invited to have coffee. About a month ago, we had another coffee. I took 3 other black business people with me in my community, and that has grown to 15 people. The last city council meeting in my community, they did a proclamation because they're going to bring in a diversity program. So we can't be afraid. We can't let them put us in a box and say, oh, you can't do this because you're whatever the reason is. We have to know our worth. And we have to be about it. We can't just talk about it. We have to put those policies in, make them put the daggone policies in place, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's also our responsibility, right, for your generation. I remember being in a training, and I was kind of giving myself pats on the back about being trilingual, right? I can speak this, that, I can code switch. And my mentor called me over, and she said, and she was Asian. And she said, every time you code switch, you move out the way for another sister to take the bullet. And I was like, what does that really mean? And so what it means to me is every time I go and put on a mask and pretend that I am someone that I'm not, it doesn't make room for you to show up authentically yourself. And so as a light-skinned woman, right, I cannot continue to enter rooms and set the example that this is what a black woman looks like, well-behaved, right? I have to make room. And so it is my responsibility to the generation, to the culture, to say, you know what, if stereotypes, people are gonna have their own bias, their comments, we will never change that. But what we can change is how we show up for each other. Because if I don't make room at the table and give room for other black women to show up differently than me, I always keep the power. So then how do we fall right into who we are? I'm a black woman, I talk how I talk, and I show up like that every day, so that when you show up and you talk like you talk, there's no barriers there. And so it starts to just with us, because I think, honestly, I believe that there's a critical mass of black people who aren't ashamed of being black anymore. So I think that myth is gone, right? We're not ashamed of being black. What we are is sick of oppression.
That's right.
We're paralyzed by poverty, right? We show up into places and we're not giving access to things, right? We are watching our black families being looted in the streets. That's what we're ashamed of. So being black is not something that we show up ashamed of. Just giving the counter narrative to the dominant narrative is what we have to start doing. I think it goes back to your monument comment. Like, what do we do about the monuments? Do we take them down? And I kept saying, don't take them down. Give a counter narrative to it across the street.
Come on.
So for every Robert E. Lee, we got Harriet Moses Tubman across the street. So where is the counter narrative to history, right? And so that's how we begin to educate and make room for our younger generation to show up authentically themselves.
Good, good.
Let the church
I would
say
say-
amen to Sean.
Right. Amen.
I think the biggest thing about stereotypes is that we have to place the burden of removing stereotypes onto white people and to non-black people of color. And the reason for that being is whenever you place the entire burden of stereotypes on the black people, we can enter the rooms being as loud as we want and being ourselves and being our true, honest selves. But if the work hasn't been done to change the system that doesn't allow us to be in that room, they'll just not invite us back. And that's not our fault. That has nothing to do with who we are as people. So the biggest thing is when you can get white people and non-black people of color to recognize, one, if they have a bias, and two, how that bias impacts other people, then you can see them change. Because what I've noticed is when I pointed out that I saw a friend of mine cross the street when she saw a black man, she did not realize that it was something she was doing, right? And you know, we're on the East Coast, so everybody on the East Coast thinks that they're like super progressive and, you know, like we're past all these issues. But the subversive racism on the East Coast is very bad. I mean, I'm sure as you're all well aware of, and especially on a college campus, that implication is so much more uncomfortable because not only is
And
the institution,
what school do you attend?
Boston University.
Let me know.
Boston University, formerly George Washington University in DC.
That's right.
And so the implication of that is not only is the institution telling you you don't belong here when they treat you differently, but then you have students who are thinking that they're doing the right thing, not understanding it. And so when I pointed this out to somebody I know, like, you can't do that. And I need you to understand why that's dangerous. I explained to her, every time you look uncomfortable to a black man or a black woman that you see walking, the people around you pick up on that are white, especially. And they notice, oh, that might be a dangerous person. I'm gonna leave. And so you reinforce the idea that you have to be fearful of a group of people. And that one little movement, that one sign of crossing the street, not only reinforces in the black man or black woman's life that they are less than, but you reinforce to other people, oh, I was right to think that he was funny looking and that he's suspicious. And so we have to place that burden upon them to do so much more and to do better. One of my white friends who I love so much because she's like, she just has been doing this work for so long. She's been so fierce and so consistent. And her name's Lily Yergin. She just graduated from UT Austin, I believe. And last year she came to me because she did a project for her last semester trying to do the research on Fort Worth Black history. Because she realized growing up in Fort Worth ISD, she was never really taught Black history past MLK and Rosa Parks, and they don't even really teach Malcolm X necessarily. And so she decided to launch a project and get my help on it to where we want to implement not just a Black History Month project, but a year-long project called the Storyteller Project, we bring in Black people from Fort Worth who have been here, who grew up here, who were raised here, and who understand that Fort Worth was Black before it had anybody else in it, and who understand, the change makers who've come through here and how much we've implemented and affected things on a national level in the civil rights movement. And I mean, we've been working on it for the Fort Worth ISD, and it's been trouble, I'm sure, as y'all are aware of,
Right.
trying to get things like that through. But she saw a stereotype and she decided to do something about it because she realized her white counterparts aren't being educated about it. And let's be honest, most students are not going to go home and try and Google, Black civil rights activists and really dig deeper than MLK and Rosa Parks on their own. So it's up to our systems to also look at how we're stereotyping things, because when we say history, it shouldn't be thought of as white history. We shouldn't have to say Black history.
Right.
That shouldn't even be a thing. History should be thought of as a collective movement and past of every culture involved, but we've had so much of the narrative, as Dee was saying earlier, being of the people in power telling that story, that we have to say Black history in order for people to recognize the fact that there is more than like Robert E. Lee to so many things.
And there is more to our contribution besides slavery.
There's so much more.
And slaves.
Exactly.
We were entrepreneurs. We were educators. We were
musicians.
Musicians. There's a whole host. Historians. There's a whole host of history that's out there. So we have got to tell the story, and we have got to be at the tables of when those stories are told to change the narrative. Let's talk about that. Because Sean, you brought up a very important point. Let's do a counter narrative then. Okay? Let's just say that we will not be able to heal race or to kill it or to kill racism. Okay? How do we still make sure that we are creating a legacy for our families and for our children that will make sure that they are protected from the issues of racism? And when I say protected, I don't mean put them in the bubble. I mean protected from the consequences of it that cause for them not to be able to succeed because psychologically they're stuck in the mode of saying, I'm held down by the man. So help us to let's talk, let's dream a little bit. How can we do that as a people to make sure that our legacy and our history is inculcated within our young people, and at the same time that there is a confidence and a pride that they have of being Black, whereby it's not looked at it as it being a negative mark? Talk to me. Let's put it out there.
Yeah. So when it comes to that, I think our foundational starting point when it comes to that is raising the expectation bar we have for our young people and understanding the intelligence that they have. Because I think what we do is too often is that we either attempt to dumb down the conversation because, oh, you're only this age and you're only in this grade. We dumb down the conversation, or we wait to have the conversation at a later time. When you hit puberty, when you're a teenager, we'll begin to have the tough conversations, when really those tough conversations need to begin before, as the vocabulary is forming.
Like Demetria was doing, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly what has to happen. So even when they begin their own language leaps, they're affirming themselves in their Blackness because it's what they're hearing, it's what they're being fed. So they're regurgitating their diet at that point. So with our youngest babies, I mean, I know we like to do the baby talk, we like to Google Gaga, but what we really need to be doing is having just real conversations with them, even from the womb. And because, like I said, they're feeding on those words, they're beginning to incorporate those narratives into their very being. And then so there's no mistaking who they are at 40, 50, 60 years old, because it started in mama's belly, right? And so if we start there understanding we're not going to minimize your intelligence, we're going to enhance your intelligence from the very beginning. We're going to send you affirmations right now. We're going to place you around folks that look like you, that we want you to model yourself after. If we begin to understand that the true education of this young person is going to come from household and community, and we're not simply going to leave it onto an institution as a school, a district, or a college, right?
It's going to come from household.
It needs to come from household. And the school can then go in there and reinforce the tools. math, counting should be happening at home, and then the school can teach algebra, right? Yeah. We'll get there, but the basic concepts, those are things that need to be happening within the home, yes. Right? So the same thing with history. Yeah, I'm gonna want you to go in there and you're gonna learn U.S. history, 1876 to this. You're gonna learn Texas history and all that. But when you get in that classroom, you're probably gonna be the one disrupting the narrative because you're gonna be asking the teacher, excuse me, I know you said that this happened to be what happened with George Washington and that his teeth was wooden, but my dad and my grandma began to tell me that he also had slaves' teeth in his mouth. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, teacher? Yeah. So I mean, but that education got to come from home so they can begin to disrupt that narrative. Now it's 30 or 40 other young people in that class that are now thinking like, okay, let me ask a question, or I didn't know that aspect. Let me now Google and inquire a little further. Or that educator understand that they now have to shift the narrative of their own curriculum because maybe they are teaching false narratives, but it hadn't been challenged yet. And the young people can do that as well. So we got to up that bar for them.
So one of the things that you just talked about that you explained, we call it in educational circles, making sure that they have cognitive confidence. The way that you do that is that exactly what you just said, so that when they are in those circles, in their classrooms, they can question the narrative themselves because they have been taught well at home. So yeah, that's great. Anybody else? Yes.
And in addition to that, we have to lead by example as well. They have to see us. Mm-hmm. So if they have an issue in school, they need to know they can go to a school board meeting and talk. If they're having an issue in their community, in their city, they can go to the city council. Because I didn't know that. My 32-year-old son sent me a text yesterday and say, hey, Mom, can you text Royce West and see how I can get involved in community politics? I said, dude, I don't have to text Royce for that. I can tell you that, Let me introduce you to some people. But it's by example, though. Even at 32, he's seeing people that's in my circle. He's thinking about it. My 8-year-old granddaughter, she's a competitive gymnast. She's been doing gymnastics since she was 4. She went from the little gym to the gym, literally took the kid on a Thursday to the gym. That Saturday, she was competing to be on the competitive team. All the other moms didn't look like us. Oh my God, where did she come from? She's so strong. I mean, she's this, she's that. But the thing is, it's natural. She's confident. Mm-hmm. And she has a grandma to tell her, look, you can do anything you want to do, And so everything is by an example. They have to feel confident. It's that generational wealth as well. Yeah. If I'm out here helping you and whatever, I want it to come back to my grandbabies. We want to teach them the financial literacy. I don't care if it's $2. They walking into Texas Trust, putting money into their account. Because I'm raising them. I'm not mama. I'm an old grandmama for them. But I want them to know. I want them to know. So we got to just lead by example, because with me, oldest kid of 8, I was brought up by a single parent in Athens, Texas. The only Black history we got, they say, hey, there was, the slaves was free, and Lincoln made them better. That's all we learned. Yeah. Lincoln made it better. So, and D, you're right. I learned more about Black, actually. And it's embarrassing to say what's going on right now. I'm learning so much about Black history because where I'm from, it wasn't taught.
So one of the things that you said, Demetrius, that I thought was very important for us, and this is something that I always say to our congregation and to our families. It's very important for your child to see you around people who are doing something, because they will understand that this is a responsibility of leaders for our community. So the better clientele of people that you have them around, the more they get a sense of confidence, cognitive confidence, to ask questions, to be within earshot of economic and financial conversations and political conversations that are happening even in their space, right? That's one of the things that helped me in my upbringing, that I was in earshot of conversations about politics and conversations about community activism and conversations about finance and things of that nature. It really helped me to hear, to listen, to absorb, so that when I got into other places and spaces, when I got to the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, dear God, it was like, who is this dude? And why are you talking so much? And it's because that's where I came out of. And so those conversations are important. DeVoy, you were talking about economic economic and financial literacy. I know we brought it up a few times. Can you talk a little bit about that now? What is the conversation that you believe right now that we should be having? I know you talked about not just civil rights, but silver rights, but what are some of the financial conversations that you think that we should be having right now? And then I want to go back to Christy and talk about some of the political conversations that you think that we should be having right now. All right, go ahead.
Well, basically, I think we ought to get back to teaching financial literacy. We integrated everything but the dollar bill, and it has created an issue for us. So we got to start with the simple things of the family unit, which has been broken up, which creates some of the problems we're facing now. But I think we got to get back to the financial aspects of what makes things happen. Then the other thing that we got to get back to is, like the gentleman mentioned, and you have, introducing our kids to people of all different opportunities. Naturally, back in the day when you didn't have nothing but segregation, we were around each other. And we could see the lawyers, the doctors, the Indian chiefs. And today we're so spread out, we don't have that. So it starts back, like she mentioned, if it's just $2, going to the bank or the credit union, depositing them, and teaching that from a very young age. Because you're in a federalist system, you're in an economic system, and therefore, later on, as they grow up, we will be competitive. Yeah. Part of our issue is how do we become more competitive for the worth that we already have given up for 400 years?
Oh, gosh. Thank you for that. Christy? I'm sorry, Christina?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep. Uh-huh.
Yes. Yes. I think one of the most important things that we can do is really become more engaged in our political arena. And by that, I mean, we have to show up not just when we're reacting to tragedy or trauma, but we have to be engaged from day one in understanding how money moves in public sphere, who moves it, who the decision makers are, what institutions influence them. We really need to have a full education about the government that makes decisions. And there's nothing more relevant right now. We have the census that's underway, and people have to understand that if we don't participate in the census, that impacts millions of dollars in our community and what our children will have access to as far as how much funding we'll have in our local public school systems, how much funding we have for support programs like rental assistance, and it is amazing how much influence the census will have, and so we aren't counted. Those dollars are going somewhere else. They're not going to disappear. Somebody else is going to get it, and so we have to be educated and educate our children to be engaged. They have to understand the importance of making sure that you're connected on the local level and understanding who your local representatives are, your county representatives, your state representatives, not just be involved at the federal level during a presidential election year, but you've got to stay engaged all the way through and understand how important it is to connect with the people that are representing your neighborhood, your city, your county, and your state.
Yes. One of the things, that's all the time that we have for today, man.
Can I just sum up what I think she just said?
All right, go ahead.
We got to begin to understand the economics of politics in the politics of economics.
And mic drop. There it is. Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Pastor Kai, I have one more.
I want to say that's right, huh?
Kai, I have one thing.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a daring belief in hope. A belief that completely flips what we imagine a representative democracy to be. Story real quick. Imagine if Six Flags never went out and tried to sell a ticket and wondered why people weren't engaged with the park. And same is true with our government. If it's supposed to be representative, there's also a responsibility for our leaders to listen, learn, and act in a way that's connected to the community. And so I have hope that, when that onus of responsibility is bilateral, that then we completely transform a city, and watch what happens when we do that.
Thank you for that. Listen, that's all the time that we have for today, and I know that we can go another hour in talking about race because it's a real entity that lives within the fabric of our society. I used to say that slavery and or racism is the dye that has been set within the fabric of this country. Now I say that racism is the thread, a part of the threading that is a part of the fabric of the country. So we won't be able to take out the thread piece by piece, but I do believe that we can add on to it. And I do believe that we can change the narrative. You've heard so many different perspectives here from different generations, from different localities, from different career choices and career paths, and all of them are very valuable. The conversation needs to be had. So wherever you are, we're in the space that you live, have the conversation about race. Make sure that you arm yourself and the people that you live with the proper information that is going to help them to participate in the broader conversation, and even more importantly, within the broader transformation of how this society can change if we are all having cognitive confidence. I want you to understand that all of you, pastors included, please, if you are in a church and there is no conversation that is being had around the issue of race, then you are not fulfilling the totality of what the gospel is, because the gospel is supposed to be preached to the oppressed, to make sure that the oppressed goes free. There must be a conversation, just like Paul had a conversation with Peter about it, just like God had a conversation with Peter about going to Cornelius' house concerning race. It is something that we have got to do, because if we do not do it, then it's going to be buried. And if it's buried, it's going to stay there, and it's going to continue from generation to generation. So continue to have the conversation. Move into places and spaces that may be uncomfortable for you right now, but have the uncomfortable conversation, because we won't see change until we can live within the crucible of that uncomfortability. Until we meet again, this is Pastor Winfield, and I want to say thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for being willing to have this uncomfortable conversation, but a very smart conversation, intelligent conversation concerning race. Until we meet again, peace.